Welcome to FSMA Fridays, September. Hope all is well out there. Thank you for joining, and delighted to be hosting today's session. It's hard to believe it's September already. It feels like we are still early in 2017. Excited for today's topic. As many folks know, we did launch a survey similar to what we did last year, the Acheson Group and Safety Chain, but an assessment of food safety and quality operations. This one was a little bit more wider in scope versus just FSMA, and we'll kind of dive into that. But as always, this is FSMA Fridays. We'll absolutely be talking about FSMA as well, and we'll go ahead and get started. So as always, I'm delighted to be hosting Jill Bender here with Safety Chain. Recording, a little housekeeping here, recording will be sent as always early next week. We encourage questions and answers, please, FSMA related, all things. Let's go ahead and get those in there, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can. And again, if audio is via speakers and you're not quite hearing well enough, go ahead and call into the number provided. Delighted as always to have Dr. David Acheson with us today. Good morning, David.
Oh, good morning, Jill, and or good afternoon, depending where you are.
Yes, I always forget. Us West Coast people often think that way. It's all morning, right? No, thank you for joining us. We're looking forward to today's topic. So let's go ahead and just dive in. I know quite a lot is going on with FSMA. Let's hear what you have.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jill, and hello to everybody, and thanks for joining us today. I think I've got three quick updates about FSMA. The first is the FDA is continuing to pop out guidance documents, which is always good to see, and they recently came out with a guidance document on the produce rule, which was I haven't frankly read all of it. No, excuse me. But what I've read of it, it's looking helpful. It's redefining some of the issues around who needs to comply with what and when. So if you're in the produce space, then take a look at that. I think what was particularly interesting this week is that the Inspector General, the Office of the Inspector General, issued a report which I saw yesterday. And I will admit I haven't read it all. It's like 39 pages. But the reason this is so relevant is that what this report is entitled is Challenges Remain in FDA's Inspections of Domestic Food Facilities. And for those of you on the phone who don't quite know what the Office of the Inspector General does, it's basically like an internal government watchdog police force. That is mandated to keep track of what's going on in different agencies, and it issues reports based on its findings. Why is this relevant? And it's really relevant because the title alone, in which it's sort of saying, okay, challenges. Well, what are we talking about here? And essentially what the OIG did, the Office of Inspector General, was to look at where the Food and Drug Administration is in relation to its inspections. And if you remember, which is why this is FSMA relevant, is that the Food Safety Modernization Act required the FDA to get into all of the food facilities, either what were designated as high risk within 5 years or lower risk within 7. And the report makes it very clear FDA is on track to do that. They're doing a good job at getting into all of these facilities in the time frames that they need to be working on. And interestingly, people often say, well, how many facilities are there that they're having to look at? And they estimate there's about just over 21,000 high-risk facilities. This is domestic. And about 61,000 lower risk, or what they call non-high risk. They don't use low risk. So about 21,000 high risk and 61,000 non-high risk. And as I said, the FDA is on track to complete that. So what's the big deal? Why is David focusing on this morning? And the answer is because essentially what the OIG has said is that while the FDA is getting into these facilities, what they are not doing is a good job at following up. And I'm quoting from the summary page that says, FDA did not always take action when it uncovered significant inspection violations. And the OIG recommends a number of things. That first, FDA improve how it handles attempted inspections to ensure better use of resources. Number two, take appropriate action against all facilities with significant inspection violations. Number three, improve the timeline of its actions so that facilities do not continue to operate under harmful conditions. And number four, conduct timely follow-up inspections to ensure that the significant violations are corrected. FDA's response, very simple. FDA concurred with all four recommendations. Well, like they had a choice. Why is this relevant? And sort of it ties into our survey a little bit, is as we'll get into in just a second with Jill. But what this is saying is that the FDA is getting into plants, they're finding problems, and the OIG is saying, yeah, and you're not following up. And the FDA is saying, yeah, well, we're going to do that. What this translates down to is I think we're going to get yet more pressure for response to 483s, timeliness, follow-up. FDA got egg on its face, so to speak, a little while ago about being slow on recalls, not responding adequately. I think we've talked about this before on FSMA Fridays. And they tightened up significantly because they didn't like the way this all sounded and made them look publicly like they weren't doing their job properly. And there's been consequences to that on the recall side, and there'll be consequences to this, I predict. So I think, Jill, frankly, there's a lot of juice in this one, and it may be that we should do a whole FSMA Friday about what this means, and once we've had a chance to dig into the report a bit more. Final point on updates is that I just saw this morning, flew through my email, is that the FDA has now formally announced that they are pushing out compliance dates on nutrition facts and supplemental facts panels labeling final rule. So they talked about doing that, and what they've done is essentially, depending on the size of your facility, is that they pushed it out. So for manufacturers with $10 million or more in annual sales, you have until January the 1st, 2020. It used to be July 26, 18. It's moved out to January 1, 2020 if you're more than 10 million. And if you're less than 10 million, it's moved out to January 1, 2021. So that's a little bit of good news for those that are wondering about, can we continue to kick this can down the road? And the answer is yeah, you can kick it down for another couple of years on that one. So a few exciting updates there, Jill. But let's get into the survey. So back to you.
No, great, thanks, David. It's interesting, and I think with the, if I could just mention on the FDA report, I know that just came out in regards to the FDA, and wouldn't expect you to read 40 pages in time. But I am curious as far as their response of yes, agreed, but there wasn't any response of but, we budget, resources, and, you know, all the other things that they usually chat about.
Yeah, you know, and there may well be something here in the small print about that, but and it will obviously make sense to leverage this into a resource request. But you know, bottom line is they did that, at least in the summary, there wasn't a yeah but. It was just like, nah, we agree. They don't have much choice, frankly. The Office of Inspector General is powerful, and it's not in FDA's best interests to start to get into a war with them because they'll lose. So yeah, you're right. It is resource dependent, but follow up on 483s. I think that's where the bite will come on this.
Okay, great. Well, I would say let's go ahead and get started, and just sort of a note. I actually did get kicked out of WebEx, so I think it looks like I'm back in, but I know that I have my colleague on, so we can just go ahead and forward to the next slide, and we'll keep the show moving. 1 second, please. So as David was mentioning, we are delighted to share a survey that both the Acheson Group and Safety Chain sponsored. About a year or so ago, we did a survey very similar that was focusing just on FSMA Fridays, and FSMA and readiness and so forth. But it looks like in everything that's passed in the past year or so, it really did make sense to sort of expand the dialogue and so forth along the lines of where people are at with their operations survey and, their operations and some of the challenges and what they're doing to improve upon them. So again, delighted to share this. I do see questions are starting to come in about FSMA in general, so let's keep that going because we absolutely want to address some FSMA questions after we speak about some of the results. So with that, let's go ahead and take us to some of the survey demographics. Just to confirm, Dave, are you seeing the slides move forward?
Yeah, no, I am. It's caught up, Jill. Yep.
Oh, perfect. Excellent. Okay, so just sort of quick demographics on it. We had approximately 400 responses. I know many people who respond to our survey are on today. Thank you for that. Interesting enough, as far as the role goes, over half of the responses were in quality, and then add another 25 or so % in safety and in compliance. And then we had percentages in regards to procurement, overall operations, and so forth. Overwhelming company type was manufacturing. Produce had a solid 10% as far as responses, and then it really was a breakdown of different percentages regards to other areas as far as distribution, broker, consultant, and so forth. So interesting in the respect that this really is manufacturing response related, which is a lot of what we talk about. So I think that's great. And then just finally, from a distribution of size and location, veered more towards larger companies versus, say, above 100 companies, 100 employees. And location-wise, much more U.S., Canada-based that replied, with only about 17% international. So that was our demographic of who the responders were, and we will go ahead and just dive into some of the questions. So with the first one, the question was regards to oversight and management of food safety and quality programs. We assessed the survey's participants' view on this, and if they were responsible for that, first of all. And approximately 95% of respondents indicate they were either fully or partially responsible for ensuring regulatory, non-regulatory requirements are being met. But yet, when we asked to assess their level of success in meeting key areas critical to ensuring these requirements are being met, the level of success sort of peaked at about 50%, with varying degrees there. Thoughts, David, on that?
Yeah, I think, as you pointed out, Jill, we had a good spread of people who responded to this, heavily in the manufacturing sector, but a spread between those that have been compliant with FSMA now for a year, and those that are just sort of getting going between the small and everybody else. And we've obviously got the people answering this survey whose job it is try to keep the ducks lined up. And I think my high-level take on this is that there are challenges in terms of timing. Is like, are we getting things done? Are we missing things? Are balls getting dropped? There's as the slide points out here, records accurately documented, well, yeah, about 50%, but then there's 50% that are struggling with that, which if we just take that one, I don't know how many times we've said on FSMA Friday, if you don't write it down, you didn't do it. And this huge focus from the FDA around the record keeping. It's a constant drumbeat. And I would comment, Jill, there that I think, as FSMA implementation, at least for preventive control rule, evolves from, do you have your plan written, which is obviously where we start, is have we got the plan written, have we got all the components in there, we're working on our validations. We're moving into the verification monitoring component of this, where we're shifting from the nuts and bolts of the plan to the implementation of the plan. And FSMA is going to go in that direction, and when the FDA comes in, they're going to be evolving from, well, show me how you assess the risks in this. You found salmonella, well, you should have found Staph aureus as a risk, to pick an example that I was talking about the other day with somebody. And then the argument is, no, actually, no, staph isn't a risk in our product, and here are the reasons. That's the sort of part of the plan. But then it's like, yeah, all right, so salmonella is the risk. Show us the records that you are indeed controlling that risk in every run that you're doing, et cetera, et cetera. That's where the records become so critical of capturing all of this material. So I think at a high level, Jill, what this slide is telling us is there's still quite a bit of lifting going on, which isn't really a surprise, but it's just confirmation that I think there's value to continue to share ideas and to look at what the regulators are doing, and because we're all in this together. So that's my thoughts on this one, Jill.
Great, thank you. When you talk about the records properly documented, we've always talked about then what do you do with that data, right? So the answer in regards to identifying trends and identifying areas of improvement absolutely ties into this. So no, that's excellent. The next question we had was just regards to, which of our respondees fall under FSMA. And interesting enough, just below 70% do fall under FSMA. And again, with about 90%, a larger percentage of that are manufacturers. So I thought that was interesting, right? Perhaps some of them are under USDA and so forth. Any comments on this slide?
Yeah, I was surprised we had 20% of people who dial into FSMA Friday who aren't under FSMA. That's like, well, yeah. that's kind of fun. But hopefully, whoever you are, you're getting some value out of what we're talking about, which is great. But I know these may be academics and other people who are not actually directly under FSMA.
Right.
I think the one thing that jumped out at me on this slide, Jill, is that 1 in 10 who filled out the survey didn't know. This 10.6% that were unsure. At first it's like, well, don't you know? And I believe that companies continue to struggle with which parts of FSMA am I under. Virtually everybody that we speak to today who's in the manufacturing space, they know they know about FSMA. They may not be where they want to be, but they know about it. But then it sort of gets into, we're getting into the importers and various other things, and it's like, well, are we part of the foreign supply verification program? Are we part of this? Are we part of that? Are we just under the sanitary transport rule? So there is definitely, as we sort of get into some of these other rules that are obviously alive and well, like sanitary transport, which you need to be compliant with already if you're in that space. We've got a number of folk who are unsure. So to those who are out there who are listening who are unsure, then ask the questions. Let's try to put you clearly in the yes or no camp if you're not sure about which rule. So that's what we're here for. So interesting little snippet that popped out of this one, Jill, in terms of those that don't quite know yet.
No, absolutely. And in listening to sort of hindsight, I think it would have been nice, but we want to keep the survey succinct of having the next step of saying, okay, how sure are you about which rule applies to you, right? Because I think that's probably would have distilled a bit more information. Okay, great. Well, let's move on to our next question. Just regards to FSMA preparations and what folks have done now that we're well into compliance requirements are here. And again, on this, we did take out the not applicable pieces here because there was, that percentage that indicate they're not part of the FSMA requirements. But again, in the key areas that have been identified as ideal for ensuring all set for FSMA compliance, and I know all set could be in quotes because that's an ongoing thing, there's quite a bit of level of varying degrees of preparedness. What are your thoughts, David?
Yeah, again, this is, keep in mind, Jill, I'm sure we could run the numbers on this one and do a split between the more than 500 people or the less than 500 people. And because if we did split this when we put the final report together on this, I think we would perhaps indicate that the level of completeness was greater in the larger companies because they've had 12 months to be compliant. That would be my guess. But I think, even within that, we've got some interesting things that come out of this. Have companies done a gap assessment? Well, yeah, half of them, under half, have done. But 25% haven't done a gap assessment. And it may be that, this is again, it's like, okay, let's be realistic. There are still a lot of companies struggling with FSMA compliance on the preventive control rule, and sort of dialing back to basics for people is, what approach should we take? Yeah, we've got a HACCP plan. We may be compliant with a GFSI audit, but we're struggling to know quite how to make that all tie in with FSMA compliance. So helping companies perhaps to do that gap assessment, because in my view, that actually is very helpful. It kind of tells you where have I got to do the lift. If we look at PCQI training, it doesn't surprise me that that's got 60% in terms of complete. 20% haven't done it, and there's several in progress. So if you take complete and in progress, we're 70+% people who are PCQI trained. That sort of tracks, but are those people really getting it just because you've got PCQI training, which is obviously something that you kind of need? Are you where you need to be? Written a food safety plan, yeah, I mean, that seems to be totally on track, but as I said, that's where we're all focused at the moment, and we're going to have to discipline ourselves to evolve from, well, I've got the plan written, now I've got to make sure that the records are current and that we've got the ability to show the FDA when they walk in and say, well, let me take a look at your preventive controls and your monitoring systems and show me all the records and the corrective actions that you've been dealing with over the last 6 months since you became live. So all of that fits. Obviously, the third party looking at your plan, interesting. 50% of companies have had that, and I think that's often just a valuable thing, especially if you're a little unsure about is it right? Do we have it positioned correctly? And that's so. Some interesting things that have come out of this, particularly those that have really struggling with the gap assessment. So that's my thoughts on this one, Jill. And again, keeping in mind that what we want to do with this survey is to leverage it into good topics of FSMA Friday, to keep helping people to become compliant.
No, absolutely. And I think what's interesting, if we were to carry this on, and hopefully you won't, die when I say this, let's say 10 years down the line, right? If we did the exact same survey to the exact same responders, it would be interesting to see the evolvement through the years. But,
yeah,
hey, we've had a run of 3 to 4 years of FSMA Fridays. You just never know. Anyways, yeah, no, absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and move on to our next question. We started then to take another level as far as assessment, and in this one it was just understanding if our audience was GFSI certified, and in terms of this, we're seeing a continued trend, right, towards the certification. So it's not surprising that of the responders, about 70, it was like 73% are certified or in the process of it. Any other input on this?
Not really. No, I mean, I think this is to be expected, and I think that as I think probably everybody on the call is well aware that the GFSI standards are really extremely well aligned with the FSMA preventive control rule requirements. Certified, as we've said before, puts you in a very good place for FSMA compliance. It's a matter of recognizing that nuance of how do you take all your GFSI-related documents, protocols, and FSMA-ify them, and just making sure that you're telling the FSMA story when a regulator walks in, and then you're telling your SQF, BRC, FSSC, whomever's story when that auditor walks in, and it's fundamentally the same documents, but the the opening act, so to speak, needs to be quite a bit different. That inspector will want you to be able to say, I get it, I understand preventive controls, I understand the breadth, I understand it goes beyond HACCP, I understand not everything has to be a CCP, which isn't quite the way GFSI portrays it, because as we've said, GFSI is based on codex, and it is a little different. But I think this is actually good to see. I think we've got, obviously, if you look at the number who are either certified or on their way to being certified, we've got close to 3/4 of respondents that are heading in that direction, and that's going to put everybody in a better place for both FSMA compliance and just general overall building good systems. So yeah, I think this will continue to grow, Jill. I think if we were to look again a year, this pie chart would have more of the dark red.
I think absolutely. And, it's interesting, too, over, the last year or two, certainly, David, I know you've really emphasized the narrative that you create when an inspector or auditor comes walking in relative to where they're from. So that bodes well with what you just shared. And there is audit type questions later on, but no, thank you for that. Let me go ahead and move us forward then in just regards to taking a step further then, how prepared and, our responders in regards to managing GFSI programs. And again, similar to the FSMA follow-up questions, the folks that were not applicable, right, we took out, so we could have some true response here. And the takeaway really is that the percentage responders that are when you take away those ones that aren't certified, it's interesting when you look at the key element of successfully managing and ensuring compliance with your GFI scheme, such as keeping programs updated or to current code requirements, or the verifying tasks are complete and accurate, managing audits and so forth. Only about a third or so indicated that is under control for grouping that together. But then the larger percentage indicated challenging or somewhat challenging. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this actually, I would say, this surprised me a little bit. Because really, to me, what this is saying is that we've got 50%, I mean, just to try to break it down, 50% plus who are struggling, and I'm using that as a David term, in that they were either found it challenging or somewhat challenging, so to manage the GFSI program. And if you look at the not a problem column, as you said, Jill, it's 1/4 to 1/3 of respondents said, hey, we got this covered, we're fine. And it would be, it'd be interesting to explore, well, what are you struggling with? And as you look down this, we did break this down into staying current, keeping the records, making sure everything's stitched up, managing the audits and the continuous improvement, et cetera. Every sort of an even spread of struggle, so to speak. And I would suspect this is probably resource-driven for virtually everybody, is staying current with these programs is a challenge. And we've now, as we're getting into this space more and more and more, and it's what we've just been saying, is that we have to stay current with our GFSI certification because our customers demand it. And we have to stay current with our FSMA requirements because there'll be regulatory trouble if we're not. And, I refer back to my opening comments about the Inspector General report, where they're basically, the IG is smacking FDA saying you're not following up on things that aren't, that need to be followed up. So this sort of spins right back to resource. And earlier in the survey, you pointed out most of the people who filled it out are quality type individuals, and I think that's probably mostly who's on this call. And I think as a group, everybody in the food safety world, we need to figure out how to communicate to our bosses in the C-suite about how where things have changed. Those who've heard me talk about this, I talk about the changing landscape of food safety, and it really has changed. And it's becoming an increasing vulnerability point for food companies. And while it's often not considered as a return on investment, it's kind of critical, because if you don't get these things right, you lose your GFSI cert, or you get whacked because you're not compliant with regulations, the consequences are greater than ever. So I think this is what I'm trying to infer, Jill, that what's this data telling us is, on the face of it, it's like got a lot of folk struggling to some extent. And why are they struggling? Is it because they don't have the knowledge, or no, that's not the issue. I think for the most part it's resources. And we've got to sort of continue this drumbeat of the importance of all of this in terms of staying in business today. It's just part of what it's all about. And it would get somewhat philosophical to say, well, who pays for it, and whether it needs to be passed down to consumers who will squeak and squeal about it. But many surveys have shown that consumers are willing to pay a little more for safer food. So, but it just doesn't always translate that way. So a little bit of pontificating and philosophy there, going beyond the question, but just trying to think down the next layer on this one, Jill.
No, and I think that's, appreciating in that respect. And we've talked about resources in the past, and, the pontification or insights is good. And I can tell you from, here at Safety Chain, we talk to hundreds and hundreds of our customers and prospects and so forth. And resources is always, one of the largest barriers. So, from that standpoint, that's something that's a general theme, absolutely. Well, let's move over to then supplier compliance. We all know that, supply chain controls is a large component of the everyday success, right, of ensuring safety and quality of the product, but also most certainly a large component of FSMA compliance. So some interesting, surprising assessments in what I thought of the capabilities from responders around the carriers that manage supplier compliance, such as onboarding, risk-based program assurances, required documentation. It came in across, different ways here, which sort of surprised me. Any thoughts on that, David?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is a really key area for many companies. We've talked about supply chain and FSMA Fridays. The fact that it is now a mandate for FSMA for companies to assess supply chain risk and determine who's controlling that risk, and if it's the supplier, then get verification that it is being controlled. That is proving to continue to be a huge challenge. And I think, Jill, as we sort of look at this at a really high level, and the last couple of FSMA Fridays, we've been heavily focused on environmental control programs because they continue to be a challenge and a risk. And this is the other big one, is supply chain risk control, and the expectation of what you need to do in FSMA, and then how do you maintain that. I would say that our assessments of working with a lot of companies is that generally the onboarding process is pretty good. That's where the focus is, that's where the effort is. You can always do more, but that's usually pretty good. And the survey would reflect that that's either accurate or somewhat accurate. That's pretty good. And then when we get down to other areas about, for example, the updates that you need and some of these other things, visibility into non-conformances, basically the ongoing monitoring of your suppliers, that's where we start to struggle a bit, is particularly if you go down to the question of being able to track and rank ongoing supplier performance. We've only got a third of the respondents who felt they were okay doing that. And 2/3 that were struggling with that part, which is not surprising. So again, I think looking at how we can take this survey and help think through for companies, and this is another topic. Let's revisit supply chain risk control. Let's talk about a simple approach to managing supply chain risk around an assessment of risk and then managing those risks. I think those it continues to be a key topic, and for those that are interested, we do a lot of this at TAG, and don't hesitate to give us a shout. Just get on the phone with you and talk about this at a high level and see if we can help you. So that's the thoughts on this one, Jill.
Oh, thank you. And it's interesting your term, simple approach, in the respect that it doesn't need to be a big convoluted process. There's some baseline foundational components that I know that you work with companies, correct, on sort of helping and maintaining this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think my personal philosophy is let's keep it simple. We can create complexity, but simple concepts and simple questions to try to make it work will take you a long, long, long way to both FSMA compliance as well as protecting the brand.
Yeah, excellent. Well, let's go ahead then and move on to audit preparedness. That is obviously, you know, everything you do is always subject to being audited in many different ways. I think that we can certainly all agree on that the number of audits, you know, FSQA operations experience in any given year, whether it's, you know, regulatory, USDA, RFDA, or non-regulatory, such as customer and internal, seems to be growing, even though I know the promise of at least GFSI was, you know, less audits in the future, and that hasn't quite hit pace yet. So when asked about preparedness, delighted and a little surprised to see 60% above indicated that they're feeling prepared, but perhaps the definition of preparedness are subjective. So I find this interesting nonetheless. What do you think, Sid?
Yeah, right. Obviously, there's a very high percentage who are prepared for a scheduled audit. Well, I would hope you are. It's like, hey, we're coming. You know, we'll give you 10 days, 2 weeks notice, and so that's not a shocker. And it's also not a shocker to say companies are struggling a whole lot more with being prepared for an unannounced audit. And, you know, keep in mind that that's generally how the FDA operates, is that they're not giving you a heads up. They will just show up. And so we've got 50% who feel, yeah, I'm sort of okay, and 14.8 who are, no, I'm not ready for an unannounced audit. But, you know, that's the regulatory audit where this isn't the GFSI audit, this is the regulatory audit. And we've got less than half that feel really good about their programs being current and the records being audit ready. So we're back to records. And that's where we start to struggle. So yet again, I think, you know, appreciate people's honesty here in terms of, yeah, this continues to be a challenge of record keeping, documentation, being quote audit ready 24/7, 365. And we got to sort of think about, well, how do we make that work? And the bottom line is we got to be leveraging technology on these things so that we can get hopefully 90% of the lifting done with easy to access electronic records which stay current. Yeah, I think that's this again, not a total shocker here, Jill, but once again indicative that that there's work to be done for sure.
No, absolutely. It's interesting, too, because we did sort of this follow-up question on really breaking it down as far as, okay, well, if you're prepared for one type of audit, you know, what are the different levels of preparedness based on the type of audit or inquiry, inspection, if you will. And again, personally, I was a little bit surprised on how this mapped out because it was pretty straightforward across the board. But I don't know if you want any more thoughts on this as well in regards to preparedness from regulatory, non-regulatory, internal, and customer. That's what we asked.
Right. Well, it splits almost equally, doesn't it? You know, you're either prepared or you're not, or somewhat. It's like we've got, like 60% of respondents felt they were as ready to roll on a regulatory audit as a customer, internal or non-regulatory, with about a third being somewhat, and then just a few being unprepared. You know, the good news here is that the vast majority are falling into either somewhat prepared or prepared, which I think is absolutely accurate. There aren't many companies, I don't know any companies I've worked with recently who says, oh no, we're completely unprepared. That only happens when there's like a total disaster going on and you're trying to get everything lined up. I'm hoping that the regulators or customer doesn't walk in the door. But I think a visit by somebody to assess your systems is a visit by somebody to assess your systems. So I think that being prepared for that, being ready to handle it, is it's not surprising that this sort of sits with the different categories. It is good to see that, in fact, that the respondents feel that they are as equally well prepared for a regulatory audit as a non-regulatory audit. So that's good. That's good. I think we're getting there when we look at this particular component. Although, as we talked about in the last slide, Jill, there's a significant number of folk who feel, yeah, we'd be struggling if they show up unannounced, which of course the regulators will.
Absolutely. Well, and non-regulars, right, with some of the schemes, you know, they give you a window of that non-announced, right? But
right. Yes, exactly.
Great. Well, we're going to go ahead and then just shift it as we sort of get to the last parts of the survey. A little bit, you know, and David, you know, you brought up a little bit earlier as far as that sort of buy-in from top down and the importance and the role in which food safety quality operations fulfills. You know, you really talk about food safety culture, right? I know that's, you know, and I know we haven't touched much on food safety culture on FSMA Fridays, and besides, you know, of course, the continuous comments and dialogue around commitment to the process from the top down. So we touched on the peripheral of it, if you will. Though when asked in the survey, training and understanding the process and commitment came in with varying degrees of areas that look like could certainly be improved upon. What are your thoughts, David?
Yeah, I think you said the words there, Jill. It can be improved upon, but there's not many companies who are going to say our food safety culture is as good as we can get it. This is always to use an overused term, an opportunity for improvement space. There's always opportunities to make it better. I think, you know, if we just look at that first one, everybody on the team knows their role importance of food safety. We got half the respondents saying, yeah, they know their role, but we've got likewise, you know, 40% that, for the most part. So I think that's something that is more easily addressed than the sort of more generic food safety culture. Getting everybody to move forward is in a positive way. That's a little tougher, but certainly knowing roles and responsibilities is certainly important. The training, yeah, our team's properly trained. Well, yeah, there's always things to do there that you could get the training better. But we've got the vast majority of people who feel they're either trained or somewhat trained, which is good. And then going back to the point I made about the execs and are they actively involved, 50% said yeah they are, which is great. Obviously, what's not so great is that we've got 11% where they're not, or at least that's how I'm interpreting this, which is that's a problem in my view, is that we need to have the execs involved. They don't need to know the details. They don't need to know the science behind the validation studies, for example, but we need them involved. And so we've got, you know, almost half that where they're not as involved as they need to be. And again, speaking from personal experience, is when you've got the C-suite involved and you've got them actively engaged, you've got safer programs. There's no question in my mind. And you've got this is where the culture starts. We all say it. It's a common phrase. The culture for food safety begins at the top of the organization. So if you're looking at this and you're thinking, yeah, I need to get my bosses more engaged, then again, give us reach out to TAG. It's something that we do on a regular basis, is have conversations with senior execs around how all this works. And it's not utopian. It's not like you've got to devote massive amounts of resources. It's like, let's just figure out where the risks are and where your vulnerabilities are in your plant, in your facility, with your systems, and make sure, going back to something we said earlier today, is that you've got the right story to tell, even if you're not quite where you want to be. Showing the commitment, talking the talk, and moving in the right direction are great things to be doing to keep regulators happy. So this is again more opportunities on this one, Jill, as we continue to try to get senior execs lined up and thus drive culture in a positive direction.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And as we sort of look at our last few questions on the survey and sort of tying it together, we're certainly seeing some some general themes here. So for those that are still with us, I know we'll be wrapping up here probably about 5-10 minutes tops, but just a couple more questions that we'll share, and a few questions that come in specific to FSMA. So our second to last question was in regards to day-to-day operations, and when assessing the day-to-day operations, overall best practices, such as from visibility to the risk management strategy, cost to quality, so forth. Interesting, the customer complaints, were assessed as sort of minimal, and then, the percentage that they felt they were managed effectively came in, with 62%, saying that they thought they were doing it well. And then certainly the rest of, had varying degrees and definite areas for improvement, as we're talking about, David. Your thoughts?
Yeah, we're seeing some familiar themes coming out here. The last part of this one around tracking sustainability, where we've got 22% saying, nah, not really. Operational performance routinely tracked, 12% feel that that they're not doing it, and almost 40% aren't quite where they'd like to be, but 46% say, yeah, we're good on that. So I think we're beating on the same drum here. Is the lift to get to where you need to be for certification for GFSI or writing your food safety plan is significant but doable. It's an attainable goal. You can kind of see the goal over there. You get there. You've written the plan. You've developed the programs. The constant challenge is maintaining it. That really is the struggle, and it's the title of this one, Day-to-Day Operations, is exactly it. How do you maintain that high level of performance, record keeping, corrective actions, monitoring, follow through on a continuous basis? It is the biggest challenge, and it will become a vulnerability. That's for sure. So I think as companies look at this and say, well, I'm not alone in this space, so how do we work together as a community to understand how to do this optimally in a cost-effective way? And I think this is again, we're back to maintaining those high levels of performance that are expected by regulators or GFSI auditors or whomever's coming into your plant.
Yeah, absolutely. And the maintenance is, evolving opportunity, as far as finding better, more effective ways to manage and maintain. Yeah, absolutely. So I think the last question, and I know certainly safety chain, a good few folks who have been and worked in manufacturing for decades, near to dear to their heart as far as what's keeping you up at night. The largest concern was time. Not surprisingly, almost 80% indicated that that this was a big concern or somewhat of a barrier, followed by a close second of that resources that we talked about. Conversely, on the we're good side, regulatory compliance and understanding best practices and requirements, was about 50% indicated that wasn't a barrier. So I thought that was interesting too. What are your thoughts, David?
Yeah, well, not surprising, Jill, that the two big ones are resources and time. Absolutely. We've been saying that over and over and over for the last 45 minutes on FSMA Friday. It's resources and time, as well as making sure that the senior leadership understand that you need both. The rest of this is sort of falling into, do you know what you need to do? Yeah, most people do. Understanding what I've got to do, access to data, is kind of where we'd expect it to be. Yeah, it's a constant challenge. Nobody really feels that they're quite where they want to be because you never know quite when you get there. And then on the performance piece, both internal and supplier, we've got 50+% who would like to get that working better. And again, it's back to how do you do that? How do you manage the resources and the risks? Good news is when we look at regulatory compliance, we've got 80% of people that are falling into either, yeah, we're good with that, or yeah, it's somewhat. So I'm kind of flipping the thinking on this one around a little bit. And I've said repeatedly, even though we talk about FSMA Friday, Jill, on these calls, it's not the regulators that are going to necessarily give you the biggest headache. It's when you make a mistake and your customers, whether they be at consumer level or other businesses, walk away from you and say, we don't trust you anymore. We don't want your product anymore. We don't have confidence that you know what you're doing. We're going to ditch you and go to somebody else. When that happens, you don't have a business. When you have a 483, you deal with it and you move on and you just make sure you button it up tight. Going right back to my very first comment about where FDA is going to go with more oversight on inspections. You want to knock it out the park with your 483 response. You don't want the warning letter, because when you get that, that starts the slippery slope of other much more horrendous things happening. But this sort of the regulatory compliance piece, that shouldn't be too difficult. It's the rest of this stuff to make sure that you are producing high quality, safe products so that your customers and the consumers are happy with you and you continue to grow the business. So I think that's my thoughts on this one, Jill. You know, I think there's some great stuff in here. There's lots of leverage, lots of opportunities for FSMA Fridays. I think we're not going to have a lot of time for questions because we're almost at the top of the hour. We've been chit-chatting too much this morning. But you know, we love the questions, and I think what I'm suggesting, Jill, is some couple of upcoming FSMA Fridays. Let's grab all the questions from this one and anything on this new report that I was going on about, and drive it into some interesting topics for the next FSMA Friday and the one after.
I think that's a good plan. And there was certainly a lot here and a lot of tie-in with FSMA as well. So I think that was important. So I know some questions came in. I just want to do a little bit of a wrap-up here. One thing was with the operations survey, you know, 400 responses, a little bit of enticement. We had a little tablet offering. We did draw someone right before, so that person will be notified. Was a company based out in Massachusetts, Richelieu. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but a manufacturing company, and appreciate the person that responds to our survey. So you will be getting that email. And just in general, as we wrap up here, I know we say this all the time, but obviously with things that come up, I'm delighted that David and your team continues to be an ongoing resource to the community. I know that you work with a lot of people as well, so obviously TAG is here to help. And then, of course, from a general theme standpoint, the maintenance and maintaining and having data intelligence is what Safety Chain's food safety and quality management solutions are all about. So I always need to remind folks, but I certainly know that they know what Safety Chain is about. As far as next FSMA Fridays, it will be the end of October. We will absolutely take the questions that came in and perhaps, shoot them off to David in rapid fire, as we like to do, to see if we could stump them. But I think some other things that came up as far as supply chain risk and, some of the other areas that you brought up, David, we'll kind of fold into that, and that'll be a good folder for conversation next month. TAG newsletter, like I said, every month those newsletters go around Safety Chain, and they're good topics of discussion and informative. So if you haven't signed up for that, strongly encourage you. And then Safety Chain's out there. We'd love to see you out there. If folks going to SQF conference perhaps, or do webinars. Delighted. We have 3 customers speaking next week, October 5th, about their transition from paper manual processes to technology. So encourage folks to check that out. So with that, David, any parting words? Otherwise, we will take these questions and we'll go to next month, excuse me.
No, Jill. No, just thank you, everybody, for participating in the survey. And we really appreciate your support, your interest in FSMA Fridays. And as Jill said, don't forget, we're here as a resource to help you all manage this increasing complexity. And so that's it from me. So, again, thank you for all joining, and back to you, Jill.
No, excellent. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Happy FSMA Friday to everyone, and we'll talk next month.